Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I'm not sure where all of you live in Illinois, but I'm guessing it is very cold. So hopefully you're staying warm. I want to thank you for staying late in your workday to attend a professional development. I really appreciate that all of you are here. And we'll get started soon. It's Tuesday, January 20th, 2026, and we'll be meeting from 4 to 5:30 p.m. And the title of my presentation is Never Too Young, Developing Leadership Skills in Preschool. Um, just a couple of housekeeping things. Just I guess a little extra information. I'm here at the University of Illinois. We house the Illinois Early Learning Project. And so if you are ever in Champaign, I'd love to have you stop by our office. And hopefully I can also see some of you out and about in conferences throughout the state. We do lots of presentations and exhibit booths at early childhood conferences. Um, During the presentation today, we will be using the chat box for some audience participation. So when I pose a question to the group, I'd love it if you would ponder your answer and join in. I think it will make for more engaging and interactive discussion if people are willing to share some thoughts and ideas. If at any point I say something that's just unclear, please feel free to pop in the chat with a question for clarification. I don't want to leave anybody hanging in terms of not understanding a point or an idea. But if you have larger thoughts for discussion, we can save those for the end or for our discussion questions that we'll do as the wrap up of this conversation. And it's glad good to hear that somebody else has connections to Champaign. My Zoom background is always spring on the quad. So even if it's not spring on the quad right now, it is in this Zoom meeting. All right, so I just got to get my Zoom settings set here. Go ahead to the first slide here. I'm just going to quickly share a little bit about myself. Like I said, my name is Dr. Emily Dorsey. I am currently the director of Illinois Early Learning, which is a project you may know about. And if you don't, hopefully you'll know a little bit more before the end of today's meeting or session. Just a few thoughts about why this topic was relevant to me. As the director of Illinois Early Learning, one of the things we do is write articles and content for our website. So last year, I guess it was 2024, our team wrote an article on leadership in early childhood classrooms. And that was a great chance for all of us to do some professional learning of our own and write an article. I'll share it towards the end of the presentation, but it's actually found in a recent issue of Young Children, which may be a publication that you receive and read yourself. And the premise of that article that we kind of based the idea off of was that there's a teacher in her classroom, and she's noticing that while the students in her classroom are compliant and they follow directions, they're not taking a lot of initiative and volunteering for things. They're doing what they're told, but they're sort of not stepping out to take on leadership roles. And so she ponders, well, how might I make my classroom more friendly to children taking on those leadership roles themselves? And so that's the premise of the article, the steps that she takes to transform her classroom into a learning environment where children have the agency to move around, to help each other, to share ideas, and to make decisions together. And so those are the ideas that we will be talking about today. Prior to my role here at Illinois Early Learning, I have kind of been in this world of inclusive early childhood education for most of my career. Uh, Immediately prior to this, I was a faculty member in inclusive early childhood education at University of Nebraska-Lincoln, helping to prepare teachers to work in inclusive classrooms out in the field. I was an educational consultant focused on inclusion in North Carolina for a bit, and I've also been a public school early childhood special education teacher in Illinois and North Carolina. And I've always had an eye towards students with and without disabilities taking on those roles of leadership and ownership in their classroom. And so I have some relevant ideas of my own and examples, and hopefully you do too, that you might pull from as we talk together today. All right, so just getting starting with our agenda here. I always like to start with an agenda so people know what to expect in the presentation. The first thing we're going to talk about is what is leadership in the early childhood classroom. So we're going to get your ideas and then think about that definition in terms of various different aspects and talk about, well, what do we really mean when we say leadership in the early childhood classroom? Because that could mean different things to different people. And so we want to come with a common point of view. The next thing we'll discuss is why is leadership in young children important? And again, we're going to talk about important to who, why does it matter to them? Why does it matter to their teachers, their parents, their community? And we'll focus on, why we're even thinking that that is a good idea. Next, we'll move on to the benefits of leadership skills. And again, we'll be talking about not just benefits for children, but really thinking about the larger educational community, the school community, the children's families, and thinking about how all those people, including the children with and without disabilities, are going to benefit if everyone in their classroom has some leadership skills. We're going to devote quite a bit of the presentation to 3 strategies for promoting leadership skills. That article I mentioned in the first slide, these are the things we wrote about in the article. And so there's some really concrete suggestions and thoughts of things that teachers might do if they're really making an intentional move to promote leadership in their classrooms. Then towards the end, we'll take some time for personal reflection, kind of recognizing that inviting the children in a classroom to take a more active role might not be a comfortable spot for everyone to be in at all times and all places. And so thinking about, is this a good time for you as a teacher to increase some of those leadership opportunities in your classroom? Why or why not? And what might you do? And then ending with some related resources. So both some resources that can be found on the Illinois Early Learning website and also print materials like books and articles that you might access through your library or through your professional organizations to learn some more about this topic. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do here is think about what are characteristics of leadership in the early childhood classroom. So let's brainstorm here a bit. And so I guess if you were to see a classroom where children were leaders, maybe what's an adjective you might use to describe that classroom? If you envision going into it and you see this classroom, um, what do you think it would be like? And anyone can feel free to type that in the chat. Um, I can never read as fast as people are willing to type. So I've seen lots of great words: teamwork, energetic, determined, organized, setting examples, cooperation, asking without being asked, or helping without being asked, role models. So please scroll through. A lot of your counterparts here have added some great ideas, which, as you might have guessed, if you're attending a presentation on leadership, these are all positive things. And so that's the attitude we want to have here today, thinking about this in a positive light. So I can see where you're going, and I think it's heading right in the right direction here. So keep all those thoughts in mind, and I bet you will stumble upon all these ideas again as we go through the presentation. All right, so we're going to just work on some definitions related to leadership with some sentence starters where we'll say leadership in the early childhood classroom, and then I'm going to finish the sentence with some thoughts and ideas. So the first thing, the big one here, especially if you are teaching in a public school in the state of Illinois using the PFA a model and curriculum and standards and guidelines. Leadership in the early childhood classroom is part of the social studies curriculum. And so that's very important because, we are educating young children and we're intentional about the knowledge and skills we want them to develop. And leadership is directly related to many of our social studies goals. And at this juncture, I always like to just back up a little bit to talk about the Illinois Early Learning and Development Standards. I don't know if you'll ever be able to see it, but I'm holding up my tiny flip book right now. I don't know if you guys have these. If you don't, you should definitely get one. They have all of the Illinois Early Learning and Development Standards, or IELDS, organized in a very handy way. We use them all the time to align our content to the IELDS and consider what goals and benchmarks we're reaching. And I know a lot of teachers do as well. And the way this booklet is organized is first by content area, and you'll have things like language arts, math, science, and then social studies is one of them. And under each content area, we have several goals. So some of the big social studies goals we have: goal 14, understand some concepts related to citizenship. We're going to talk a lot about citizenship today. Goal 15, explore roles in the economic system and workforce. So exchange of good, exchange of service, those things are relevant in the classroom sort of economy at a, you know, obviously not actual money, but still we're exchanging goods and services in a classroom. Goal 16, develop an awareness of the self and his or her uniqueness and individuality. This is going to come into play a lot in terms of students understanding what they have to offer, what specific skills and traits they can offer to their peers, and where they need to lean on each other. So being aware of skills of others that maybe complement skills that they don't have yet. And then goal 17, explore geography, the child's environment, and where people live, work, and play. And that again is going to be very relevant to this idea of citizenship because, being part of your group, being part of your community, contributing, these are all things that are very relevant to our social studies community, our social studies curriculum. So just kind of hold these thoughts in mind. I believe you all got the slides and notes um, before we started, or at least the slides. And then, you probably have access to the IELDS, but just thinking about all of these goals and how they can relate to some of your social studies units is a nice thing to keep in mind, I think, throughout this presentation. All right. Here's our next slide here, which is leadership in the early childhood classroom can be learned through play. This is something that for some of you might sound redundant, but it's something I think in this day and age we always need to state. We're not going to be doing lectures and textbooks and worksheets on leadership skills for young children. We want them to be experiencing what it's like to be a leader and to be led by peers in real time, which is often in the early childhood classroom done through play. And I want you to think of different types of play scenarios or games that you have used in your classroom that encourage leadership in a child or in children. So what are some play activities that you've done where you can see, oh, that incorporated some leadership skills? And again, just go ahead and put those ideas in the chat. All right, so we have a lot of some like the real directive ones, like Simon Says and Follow the Leaders. So we're actually like giving directions, Fox says, but then some of them just are like, I'm seeing like building and block area, group problem solving, where almost kind of the leadership has to arise to the occasion. And it's not necessarily given in the direction, but you're seeing kids come step up to do it. Dramatic play, that's a great one. You kind of see those kids take charge of the dramatic play area, deciding what the scheme is going to be. That's a really good one. So yeah, some common ideas here. And if you think of others, again, holding them in your mind or putting them down when you get a chance. But um, of course, children, especially young children, are going to learn these things much more efficiently if they're experiencing them through play and getting to practice them. At this point, I want to note that IEL has two tip sheets, really nice tip sheets that emphasize these points. One called Who's the Leader, which is more of our traditional tip sheets, a little longer, that talks about specifically what kind of games and classroom activities you might do that encourage leadership in children. Just like you're all saying, some of them are going to be those directive games, but other times it's different opportunities like dramatic play or even like being a tour guide for families who visit the school. And then we have one called Work and Play Together, which is a really nice graphic tip sheet. That's one of our tip sheets that comes in multiple languages and has a lot of, well, has pictures and just a little bit of language. And it's a great one to send home or post in your classroom that gives very simple strategies for encouraging children to work and play together. And some of those things are going to include leadership of one child guiding another in an activity. Um, all right, next slide here, next sentence here. Oh, and classroom jobs. I see this popped up. That's a great idea. Leadership in the early childhood classroom is, or here's the pause, is for everyone. It's for children with and without disabilities. This is something that we're going to revisit a whole lot through this presentation. This is not a presentation with the idea in mind that there are children who are typically developing who are going to be a leader or a helper or a buddy to students with disabilities. This presentation is much more geared towards the idea of all children have leadership abilities. Sometimes children with disabilities are going to have even more specific, unique traits or skills that they're experts in that they can help their peers with, and that everyone in the classroom can both be a leader and they can benefit from the leadership of others. So it's a very universal idea, not like you're going to identify the leaders in your classroom, which would make you identify the followers, which would not make sense. And then, of course, acknowledging that children from a variety of cultural, linguistic, and socioeconomic backgrounds can be leaders. And a lot of this is to just kind of challenge the idea that, I think as teachers, I was, guilty of this, if that's the right word. You spot the leaders, the natural leaders, very easily. And it can be easy to say, well, here's my leaders. They can take charge. They know what to do. And kind of you feel like you have leadership in the classroom because you have a few leaders. But this presentation is really going to push us all to acknowledge the leadership in all children and not kind of be good with the status quo of just identifying those first two leaders. Um, and all right. So we're going to move on here to the next slide here. And here's where I liked, at this point in the presentation, I like people to kind of start thinking of examples from their own life, not as a teacher necessarily, but your own life as a person in the world who is involved with whatever you're involved with. Because our sentence here is leadership in the early childhood classroom is related to agency. And agency is this idea of you're invested, you care about something, you're part of it. It matters to you how that activity or group or project or process turns out. So just, thinking right now of something in your life where you feel a sense of agency. I've done this kind of exercise with myself um, throughout the different presentations I'm given, like uh, I have at times been the PTA president at my children's elementary school. Right now, I'm involved in the band patrons for my children's middle school. I've had kids on baseball teams. We attended church. So just different groups where it matters to me what happens. And so thinking of yourself in those situations and then picturing the students in your classroom as people who have that sense of agency in the classroom. And then when we read this list, I think it's more relatable because we say that when children demonstrate agency in a classroom or in whatever they're invested in, you're going to see them asking questions, making suggestions, challenging ideas, and refusing a task either verbally or non-verbally, and sharing ideas. And sometimes you might see this list and you might think, well, that doesn't sound like they're being very compliant. Like, I don't think they're on board if they're doing some of these things. But again, if you think about yourself in a time and a place where you had agency into what was going on, you're probably asking questions. If you're about to vote for something important, you're asking questions. Um, At your school, maybe you're on a committee or part of a union or something like that. You're making suggestions. You might be challenging ideas. Very few of us get involved in something where we have true agency and we just agree to everything. When something matters to you, you speak up when it doesn't feel or sound or think right to you. And so seeing children do that in a classroom, that can be viewed as a real strength in terms of them having agency in what's going on. If they just didn't care at all, they might never ask questions or make suggestions or challenge an idea because they might think it doesn't matter. Like what difference would it make? Do people want to hear these thoughts and ideas? Am I allowed to say no to something that's being offered or suggested? Do people want my opinions? But if you have a classroom where you're encouraging leadership, you're going to see all these things. And it could be a little uncomfortable because, if you hadn't encouraged all this, you might see less challenging ideas or making suggestions when you didn't intend on giving a suggestion. So it's a little bit of a shift, but I think when we think about ourselves as agents in something that matters to us, we can easily understand why all of these actions make sense. These are the things you do when you care about what's going on somewhere. So it's good to see children doing these things. And so then to make the point that early childhood educators who respond to and engage positively with these demonstrations can cultivate agency. And just thinking through a simple example kind of easily makes this make sense. If you offer um, a child, or if you offer the class, like, we're going to choose our snack. Do you want the apples or the bananas? And then somebody raises their hand and they say, oh, you know what? Like, we have people who are allergic to those. Like, what if we choose papaya instead? They challenge you. And if you shoot them down and say, we only have two choices, I wasn't asking for feedback. Well, it's not going to engage them positively. They're going to get the message that okay, this wasn't welcome. This wasn't a welcome challenge. But if you respond with, oh, you were thinking about some important criteria that's important to our community, and you mentioned that, thank you. That's going to encourage that feedback from them, that leadership skills. So I like to kind of dwell on this slide a little bit to kind of get people in the mindset that agency and leadership is not always about agreeing with everything and complying. It's about thinking critically about what does this community need, what's going to be good for it, and speaking up for it. And so you might hear a little more from children. All right, so time to like brainstorm a little bit again. So I'm assuming most of you are involved in early childhood classrooms in some way, um, thinking about what are the benefits of leadership in early childhood classrooms. And when you think about those benefits, you can think about the benefits to just the classroom or just the students or even to larger communities or groups of people. So go ahead and let's see those ideas. Some benefits you might see: pride, ownership, engagement, lots of skills, helping each other, autonomy, relieves the teacher from some tasks, confidence, self-esteem, independent thinking, modeling leadership, confidence, yeah, growth and questioning skills, getting ready for kindergarten, um, developing empathy and how to communicate. These are great, great ideas. And I think if many of us can picture just in whatever context a good leader in our life, they exhibit lots of these traits and skills. Um, so you're right on track here. We're going to talk through some of these benefits, life skills for sure. All right, so let's get into the different benefits. So first we'll talk about the benefits of leadership skills in early childhood classrooms for the children, just for the children themselves. And a lot of these you all just put in there. First one is they're going to gain communication skills. Again, thinking just to our own lives is very hard to be a leader if you can't communicate your goals and wishes and responsibilities with other people. That just doesn't always mean verbal communication, and we'll talk to that, but conveying your intention and ideas to others is an important part of being a leader. And so You're going to gain communication skills if you're a leader. Also, collaboration skills. We're not talking about self-leadership. We're talking about, leadership of other people in the classroom, which inherently means working with others. And so to do that, to be an effective leader, you have to be able to collaborate because you need to be a person whose voice is valued among your peers, and you have to collaborate to do that. Building relationships and feeling like part of the classroom community. Again, this is a time where I think a lot to experiences I've had in my own life where taking on those leadership opportunities really does help build relationship and make you feel like part of a community. Like you might think, oh, it's really overwhelming to run the PTA carnival, and it is. But during those process, that activity, I built relationships with a lot of other people, and I felt like a part of the school community. And there's a high payoff for feeling like you're a member of a group. People, children especially, really value that. Um, Develop ability to advocate for self and others. So this is, that idea of speaking up for yourself of what do I need in this setting? What what do I need to ask for myself or request or get? And then how can I advocate for others? If I notice people in my community who don't have what they need, whether it's at snack or at their learning centers or when they're outside, how can I speak up for them? That's a great skill. Then, of course, we're always thinking about children in early childhood classrooms where they're going next. So they can transfer and use leadership skills in other environments. This can be as simple as their home, their local playground, maybe sports or scouts or different activities they do. And then building a foundation of leadership skills needed as an adult. I often like to think of this like you think about reading or math. It's not like you just arrive in high school and it's like, well, now it's time to learn leadership skills. These are things where you learn a little bit as you go all the way up the ladder. And so you want to start building that in the early childhood years because, if you're comfortable being a leader in preschool, then you're comfortable in kindergarten and you keep building on that. And it's not so intimidating later on. So lots and lots of benefits for children um, to give them opportunities to be leaders in the early childhood classrooms. But we can think beyond just the children, even though, they're our most important people in the classroom. Um, thinking about it more as not just individual children, but like the community as a whole. So going back to that first question of how might you describe a classroom that you entered where you see lots of leadership skills? And you gave lots of really positive adjectives there. Um, and again, I think just thinking about any activity or group or agency that you've been involved with that has sort of active, involved leadership of its members, how that felt, why that is a more positive and engaging place to be. So the classroom community is going to experience more collaboration. People want to work with each other because they know that their voices are being respected and they know how to listen to the voices of others. And they have some skills for working together. And so collaboration feels good in those classrooms. Um, and so you have people joining together. Higher quality independent work. Um, and this one I think is a little bit, you kind of got to think through it. But lots of times when we're involved in leadership or ownership of our spaces and our learning activities or whatever it is we're doing, we're invested. We know what the point is. We know what the purpose is, and therefore we can be a lot more productive independently. And so, if children have had a say in what kind of work they're doing and how they're doing it, and understand why it matters and who they can work with and how they can share materials, um, they have the ability to be much more independent and do good work because they're not feeling like they need to go to an adult all the time. They've been invested in creating those processes. Um, a reduction in challenging behavior. Again, this isn't like a cure-all. There's always going to be some students who just truly have, some needs in terms of behavioral supports. But a lot of times for young children, if they know what they're supposed to do, why it's important to do it, how it can be done, they have the things to do it successfully, and it's engaging, then you don't need to have challenging behavior because you have work that has a purpose and you know how to get it done. Lots of challenging behavior in classrooms happens because children don't have a sense of purpose or what's going on or an idea of what should be done right now. And so when they do and they're involved in those decisions, you can see a big reduction in challenging behavior. Another one is efficient setup and cleanup routines. Again, when you know what's supposed to happen and how it's supposed to happen because you were involved in that, you could be part of that and do it well. And so, they're going to be invested in those routines. And then increase teacher availability. This one, I think you'll see more how this comes into play when we talk about one of the strategies, which is facilitating peer supports. But if children have ownership and agency of their classroom and they know what to do and how to do it, and they are able to ask their peers for support or offer their peers support, then the teacher doesn't have to be the person like monitoring every little interaction and problem. And the teacher can really devote him or herself to more strategic interactions, one-on-one teaching or small group intentional teaching, because you're not the big monitor. The children kind of have a sense of what is supposed to go on and how to do it, and they're invested in doing it well. And it can free the teacher up to be more focused in some of his or her interactions. All right, the next idea here is benefits of leadership for teachers. So thinking about all of you and kind of remembering myself in this role, what that felt like. There's some opportunities here. So teachers have the opportunity to reframe and reshape perceptions and expectations. So if you were a teacher who was not interested in children having a lot of agency in the classroom or speaking up or voicing their opinions or saying how they want things to be. And you really were hoping for people to kind of be compliant and follow directions and just do what they were told and not challenge each other. You might view some of those things we saw on the agency slide as bossy, or problematic, things that you wish to decrease in your classroom. But if you shift your lens a little bit to think about, oh, I want them to be leaders, even if it's going to stretch me a little bit as a teacher, um, you might start seeing those qualities and characteristics and actions as strong leadership potential. And instead of trying to end those things, you might think about shaping them. Well, this student, they didn't like what I offered and they spoke up about it, but how they spoke up about it wasn't ideal. Let's work on that kind of thing versus like they just need to know that I'm in charge and, I don't need an opinion about what we're having for snack. Um, those are two really different lenses that you could take towards some of those things related to agency. So it's opportunity for teachers to view things differently. Um, and then again, it's a real opportunity to transform or shift a classroom environment from mostly teacher directed to shared leadership. I mean, these are young children that you're not going to hand over leadership to 3-year-olds. So we're not saying that. You're going to obviously be paying attention to safety and well-being and all of those things and routines, and you're the adults and all that. But um, you might really notice a difference in a classroom where the teacher is in charge to a classroom where really there's a lot of student input on things that it's appropriate for them to have input on. Um, and thinking about, is that something you would like? Is that something that's welcome? I mean, I definitely would think of this as kind of a spectrum where you might move there slowly, kind of tip the scale a little bit, not just jump all the way to the other end at once. Um, but yeah, really thinking about, is this an opportunity you'd like to take to move in that direction? So that's something to kind of ponder as we continue. But I would count that as a benefit. At least the benefit to ponder it and consider what you think about it. So now we're going to actually jump right into those three strategies that I talked about, and these are in the young children article that I described, which I think you got a PDF of. Um, and these are the three things that we'll discuss for the next little while here, like the strategies you would use. The first is to provide information about, model, and acknowledge citizenship. So it's this idea of we're going to teach what it means to be a citizen of this classroom. And the students are going to use that as an anchor to understand what it's like to be a leader in this group that I'm a citizen of. The second idea is to facilitate peer supports. So, when we're thinking about students as leaders, we're thinking about them as leaders of each other. And so this requires, peers to lean on each other, trust each other, know what their peers can do for them and with them. And so really facilitating an environment where students are inclined to rely on each other. And then the third one is shared decision making. And so this, really is kind of nudging us to think of a classroom as like, similar to a democracy. We're obviously going to vote on everything. I don't mean it that literally, but a lot of decisions that are relevant to the group where it's appropriate for children to weigh in on them, they're part of those decisions. And we'll talk about a lot of different strategies where we can pull from the opinions of all the children in the classroom and make decisions that represent the thoughts and ideas of the full group. And just in case you are thinking about this presentation and wondering how it relates to developmentally appropriate practice, I like to acknowledge at this slide that these ideas align really well to the core considerations of DAP, which are commonality, individuality, and context. So when we talk about commonality, obviously we're thinking about groups, making group decisions, being part of a group. That all relates to commonality. Individuality. So on the one hand, you have the group, and on the other hand, you have what each individual student is going to bring to that group, their skills and their thoughts and opinions. And then the context, which is what is this classroom? Who are the people here? What is our school, our state, our larger setting, and how does all of this relate? So if that's something that you're keeping in mind, this does align well with DAP. All right, so the first idea that we're going to talk about of the big three here is provide information about, model, and acknowledge citizenship. So this idea of you're a citizen. So here's what I want you to ponder in the chat is you can do either and or you can do one or the other or both of these bullets. Define citizen. So if somebody asks you like, what's a citizen? And then what does citizenship look like in the early childhood classroom? Go ahead and ponder those ideas and share your thoughts here in the chat. Questions get a little harder as we go. Students in a classroom, part of a community, help, member of a community, member of a group contributing ideas, having specific roles, maybe like a family, taking on jobs, contributing, okay, ideas, respect. Yeah, so I'm seeing lots of keywords here, and you're thinking what I'm thinking here. So definitely scroll through those ideas to see what your other attendees have said about this. But definitely, sure. Um, all right. Okay, so when we talk about kind of answering this question for a definition, um, if you're a citizen, you're part of a group, maybe you're caring for others, you're sharing your ideas and you're exploring respectfully. Again, I think if you yourself want to just picture any group that you're a part of, it can be your neighborhood, it could be your town, your state, your any sort of extracurricular, your work community and just kind of map these on, I think it makes a lot of sense. So you're caring for others, you're sharing ideas, and you're exploring respectfully. You're caring for the community. So that'd be for students, that'd be like the people in their classroom and the environment. So that's likely their classroom, but it could be their school, their playground, their neighborhood, depending on the school. So you're noticing what it needs and taking care of it. And the things you might see, the actual actions, you might notice students helping clean up, assisting a peer with a difficult task, sharing thoughts on a class project. Again, these are things that transfer really well onto real life things. So, if you're part of like, I'm part of the college community here, helping take care of the building that I'm in, assisting my coworkers if they have a task that I know how to do, or if I'm part of a Teams chat or a professional development group, I'm sharing my thoughts. These are all things that we might see students doing for them to demonstrate that they are a citizen in that group. Again, when we see people not feeling like citizens, on the one hand, they might not be speaking up and expressing where they have ideas that differ, or sharing conflicts or challenging, but they're probably also not doing these things like looking out for others, knowing who needs what, voluntarily cleaning up or assisting because they're just not feeling part of that group. And so when you see people really caring about the people and the environment that they're a citizen of, you do see quite a bit of interaction and intention there with what they're doing. And that's what we want to see in terms of citizenship. But we can't just expect 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds to know what citizenship is and just throwing out a phrase like, you need to be a good citizen doesn't mean a whole lot unless they have an understanding of this idea. So, this is something I would encourage you to teach intentionally to the young children in your class. So, starting off with just teaching the actual vocabulary, I'm going to start using the word citizen. Here's what it means. Listen for it. See how I use it in a sentence. Does it make sense to you? Can you use it? Do you have questions about what that means? You might just describe it, use it in some sentences, or say it. You can use puppets to demonstrate citizenship and good actions. So, you know, have a little skit where the puppets are talking about what they appreciate from each other or cleaning up the environment. So the students can kind of see a little model example skit of citizenship uh, and that they can then replicate. I mean, puppets are appealing, and so they might try it themselves. Um, The next thing you might do is model and narrate your own good citizen behavior. So kind of calling attention to yourself, just so they can see that model of, um, oh, I want to be a good citizen. So I'm going to shut off these lights before we leave the room. I want to be a good citizen. And I noticed that Johnny isn't able to pick up his toys, as fast as his friends. So I'm going to go help him. I'm going to try to be a good citizen here. So you can kind of narrate your own citizenship and they can see, oh, that's what she means when she uses that word. Then you might take it a little further to comment on good citizenship behavior of the students. And again, here, this is where we want to really make sure it's all the students. So, and again, some of them are going to do it real fast and it's going to be easy to spot. They're always good citizens. They're always cleaning up. They're always helping. They're always asking what they can do. So you might have to look a little harder for some other students doing it and really taking the time to see, well, who am I not able to acknowledge? What could I prompt them to do here so that you can then acknowledge them as being a good citizen or, asking them, what do you think you could do to be a good citizen here? And then they do it and you can acknowledge them because you really want the students in the class to see that this is a group goal, not like we have some good citizens and then we have other people. Like we're all doing this, we're all trying. Um, Inviting children to share examples of citizenship that they have seen in themselves or others. So, people who are 4, like they're good at thinking about what they've done right away. So they could say, I did this and I did that. And, you know, but then really challenging them, well, today I want you to pay attention to the other friends in the class. Like, don't think so much about you, but like, I really want you to notice somebody else being a good citizen. I want you to tell me about it. So they can see, like, it's not just about them, and they can start to recognize that happening in the classroom. So, a lot of times it's just an awareness and then encouragement of that behavior, and then reflecting on, did we all act like good citizens? What happened to our classroom? Well, it's clean and it's tidy. People feel good. They got the help they needed. Um, so just having them understand that word and what it means to be a good citizen of the classroom is something you can teach explicitly and then encourage them to reflect on it from time to time. The next one is to facilitate peer supports. So this is where, um, students are going to help each other. So just again here, inviting you to put your thoughts in the chat box. If someone asked you to define peer support, what would you say? And then what might it look like in your early childhood classroom? So you can just give a concrete example of, where or how you might see classroom supports or peer supports. Helpful friend, encouraging, oh, high five, that's nice. Saying great job. Um, Scaffolding learning, so maybe helping but not too much, helping each other, assisting a peer without teacher direction, acknowledging feelings. Yeah, giving hugs. There's a lot of emotional support here, a lot of help or playing together, kind of joining each other in play. A lot of ideas about turn taking, not needing an adult to tell them what to do. Oh, encouraging a friend to make the right choice. Like, how can they figure out what that might be? Looking to see who's alone. These are great. Um, and so, yeah, and a lot of these really rely on child initiative here. They're noticing what needs to be done to help a friend, and they're doing it, and respectfully and in a helpful way. So if we think about defining it and keep going with the ideas, they're great. And you can scroll through each other's ideas here. So if we think about peer def supports defined, um, children helping each other with daily routines and learning activities. A lot of your examples were related to that. Um, Children with and without disabilities can be helpers. That is a big idea I like to hone in on. And um, a child can be an expert based on their special interests as well as their skills. And so, this is kind of what I would be looking for, and you might want to be looking for or encouraging if you're thinking about peer supports. So some of it's not really big stuff, daily routines and learning activities. This is just them looking around and seeing who needs help, with this part of our day. It's not really that different than like a lot of us going through regular life, with maybe our family, like who needs help getting through this doorway, because they're carrying too much stuff. Or, who in my family looks like they got too many chores right now left on their plate. How can I step in and help them? It's just noticing and stepping in. Um, we'll talk in a minute about children with and without disabilities, but really having that lens in mind that this is not based on the person with the disability being the person who is helped. This is about them becoming a leader as well and viewing a classroom through the lens of all children being helpers. And then thinking about expert skills that we'll talk about. So I think like we all kind of have examples of this in my life. And as long as the person being expert doesn't mind, it can feel good. I was thinking about, my husband, jokingly, my mom calls him IT support. So like when the four of us go visit my mom's always like has some random IT task and she considers my husband like the expert on that. So he has to like program her TV or whatever. And so you might have kids with a very, specific interest or skill that other people kind of tap as the expert. And as long as that feels good to them, that can be a really useful way to have somebody be a peer support to others. So here are some ideas on ways to facilitate peer supports. Um, okay, so one is to encourage children to seek out peers when they need assistance. This sounds really simple, but this is kind of where it could get a little difficult, or the rubber could meet the road in the classroom where, the first time you suggest that instead of coming to you, they go to a friend. Um, there could be some kinks to work out. Like you definitely know how to help them open that milk carton, and you definitely know how to help them with that zipper, and you definitely know like what they should do to get that computer program working. And it could take some trial and error for them to find the peer who could really help them with the thing they need help with. But I mean, I kind of think about it similarly to like I think about it my own work. You know, let's say I have to format a Word document and I don't know how to do it, and I don't really want to track down like IT for official assistance. I might go to three or four coworkers and then be like, okay, you're the one who knows how to help me format this Word document, you know? So it's not always efficient to start with, but this is sort of how real life works. When you're seeking out people to give you assistance and people are figuring out what kind of assistance they can give, there's a little bit of a learning curve there. And so, yeah, you might have some more time with people asking peers for help, but I think they will land sooner than later. But the point is they're going to each other and not to an adult every single time. They're relying on people in their community, which is also related to citizenship. Another thing, though, to make it a little bit more efficient is to help children identify expertise in themselves or others. So it is kind of it's good to know, like, what am I good at? Like, what could I help people do? Um, I'm a really organized person. Like, this is a skill I have in life. So when I have a friend, maybe who's moved, I don't just say like, I can help you with anything. I'm like, I could organize your kitchen cabinets. I do know how to do that. Like, and I could do it well. That's the thing that I'm an expert in. Um, and it's good to know what you're good at, and it's good to know what your friends are good at. And so maybe you have some conversations in the classroom where you talk about, well, what are some things you feel really strong in? Some skills you're like, I could do that for my friends. Um, I'm pretty good at that, and building an expert chart. So you actually have people's names and what they're good at, and getting kind of organized of, here's the people who can really help when your iPad is down. And here's the people who are really good at hats and coats if you need help, like, getting them inside right side out or doing zippers. And here's the people who are really fast at putting the blocks away in the right categories on the shelf. And so I can go to them for help. And again, making sure that all of the children on the expert chart, if you were to make one, all of the children are on it. And so you might have some students who have disabilities, it's not coming to you right away of like, what are their strengths? What could they help people with? But you might have some of your kids maybe with communication needs who already know how to use technology way ahead of the curve of other students. If they're using an AAC device or iPads, they could be very good helpers. They might have a special interest, in trains or in the planets or in the presidents of the United States or something, where they're really good at, you know, learning about a certain topic. So if other people want to learn about that, they can go to them. Um, or they're really good at knowing, what time it is. And so it's time to transition and, keeping up with the schedule of the day. And so just making sure that um, you recognize in a way that is relevant and for real the skills that everyone can offer. So you don't want it to be a token expert that no one can ever use. And so it could really stretch you as a teacher. But you might have to talk to parents, or therapists to really see, what can they help with? You want them to be part of the group. But I think that's very important that if, we're identifying everybody in the class as an expert or a helper or someone knowledgeable on something, that it really is everyone in the class who gets to be part of that. Um, and then once you have a more directive plan there, when the students start seeking out peers for assistance, you can reference that chart and say, remember, these are the three kids who are really good at helping us put on our outdoor gear. Or, these are the three that really know where we keep everything in the library. So why don't you go to one of them if you're looking for a book? And then the people who are identified as, experts or knowledgeable in an area, they're going to be invested to, you know, to be good helpers and be proud of those actions when they are able to support their friends. And then just encouraging and congratulating the children and acknowledging that they are using these skills. So, maybe when you come together at large group saying like, I noticed you asking your friend for help with the books, and I noticed you asking your friend for help with your coat. And validating that they were making good choices to rely on their peers and that their peers were doing a good thing by helping each other. So that peer supports, it takes a while to get up and running, but it can really increase those leadership skills in a classroom. All right, the next one we'll talk about is shared decision making. And again, we kind of talked about how, um, not like a literal democracy, but together making choices that are relevant to the group and represent the needs of the group. So go ahead and again, think about these questions and put chats in the box. Um, in the chat box, what might shared decision making look like in an early childhood classroom? So, what might you be doing to get those shared decisions? And then what strategies can children use to reach a shared decision together? So, how are they doing decisions and how are they doing it together? Voting on kind of an either or. An interest-based curriculum, that's a lot. Yeah. Classroom rules, voting, first then. Encouraging sharing thoughts, asking for ideas, compromise, discussions, examples. All right, lots of good ideas here with some of the, um, things that classroom jobs. That's a good way to, vote on what jobs we're having and who's going to have them, or maybe not voting, deciding. Active listening and challenging and changing ideas. So yeah, you're willing to kind of change your mind after you've heard a bunch of opinions. That's a big skill for everybody. Um, all right. So if we talk about shared decision making and a definition in the classroom, no, my notes on the right page here. We might think about children working in groups and independently to indicate their preferences and make choices in the classroom. That is a big idea that we'll get to more specifically in the next page. But just some of the keywords to highlight here are just because we're going to have shared decision making, that doesn't always mean it's like a large group discussion. So sometimes you're going to have large group or small group, or they might just be independently talking to you, but they have a voice and avenue to indicate preferences and choices. And you, as the teacher, are facilitating decisions that can represent the ideas of a lot of people in the group. And you're kind of the mastermind gathering those ideas and finding a way for them to share those ideas with each other and then reach um, decision however they decide to do it, whether it's consensus or voting or compromise, lots of different choices. Um, and so if we think about different ways you might encourage shared decision making, um, one of them is to invite participation via large group discussion, which is probably like the first one that pops into all of our heads. So, all right, everybody, let's sit down and think about, um, what we're going to do at our open house for parents. And then, people start raising their hand and chiming in. I think we all know, I bet we can all think of a time where we've been in a large group discussion, and large group discussion is maybe not our forte, and there's voices that are louder than ours, and they're more opinionated, and they're going to say their idea more times than us. And we just don't feel like a large group is like where we're going to get all our ideas out, because there's maybe some voices dominating. And even with some teacher moderation of, doing things like, okay, I'm going to write your idea down with your name by it. And once you've shared, you've shared. You don't need to go again. That can still be an intimidating venue for some kids, maybe a little too intimidating. So we don't want to limit our participation to entirely large group discussions because that's just gonna, there's some kids who really shine in large group discussions, and there are other kids I bet you can think of who will rarely raise their hand. And even if you call on them specifically, that just might be an intimidating venue for them. So other ways you can encourage participation is small groups. It might be instead of saying, all right, we're gonna, at large group today, talk about what we're gonna do at our open house. You might say, okay, today when we have our reading groups, instead of doing our books, I'm just gonna chat with each of your little groups about, your ideas. And that could be a more comfortable venue for people to get more ideas out on the table. And they're still doing shared decision making. They're still getting their thoughts and ideas out. It's just not this very specific way that we often think of first. And sometimes, you might decide that individual conversations is the way to go. So maybe instead of asking for ideas about what to do with the open house at group with like a large group or a small group, you decide, okay, at recess today, myself or my teaching assistant is going to go around with a clipboard. Um, and I'm just going to pop by each kid and I'm going to say, what do you think? What do you think we should do at our open house? And I'm going to gather ideas that way. And, you probably can't do that for every decision every time, but it is a nice way to um, seek the opinions and ideas of students who maybe are not going to pop into those large group discussions and to have them recognize that even though I wasn't loud, my voice mattered in this. And so you might tally them up and say, I talked to everybody, and five people wanted to do, a dessert tray, and five people wanted to do a skit, and, whatever you decided on. But by acknowledging it later, they recognize that even though it was quiet, my voice was heard and part of this shared decision making. And so you might change it up from time to time of how you solicit opinions. Um, this next one is especially relevant, I think, to maybe students with some certain types of disabilities um, related to language in particular, but allowing creative participation. So, like, let's say you're having um, a lunch party for families to come in, and you're getting ideas of what food you want. And there's a student who just does not have a lot of language generated about food. Maybe you have some cooking magazines and you can say, hey, why don't you look through these and circle the foods you think are a good idea? And so people can sorry, voice is the wrong word there. People can offer their opinions a lot of ways in life that don't involve talking. And I think it's really good to keep that in mind, especially for students in our class who might have language delays of how are we going to get their opinion but not put all of our eggs in this basket of people have to tell us their opinion using words. So they could draw things, they could identify pictures in, other printed materials. They could look at a computer screen, you might set of choices. They could even walk around the classroom or school or point to things that they think they want to share about. But really sort of thinking about how can we get away with all opinions are verbal and still offering people the choice to chime in. Um, you know, we'll make different kinds of decisions in a classroom, and different sorts of shared decision makings are appropriate for different times. Sometimes you want voting or polls where you're really just tallying numbers and saying, well, more of us wanted red apples than green apples, so we are going to buy red apples to make these pies. Um, and then sometimes you want compromises, which are a little more nuanced. And so you're like, well, you know, some of us wanted to do this to decide how we're going to share toys, and some of us wanted to do this plan. Is there a way we can merge them together and find a compromise? Like you wanted to do timers, but you wanted to do like if you do Tuesday and Thursday, then I get it Monday and Wednesday. Like, can we compromise? And that could be tough for kids, but they might be ready to think about some simple compromises if given some examples and ways to think about it. We have a tip sheet at Illinois Early Learning called Children's Votes Count. And I encourage you to look that up, but it gives a lot of suggestions about ways that you can solicit the opinions of different students in the classroom and help them know that their opinion contributed to the decision of the group. And I think that's what's important. It's not so much how they express their opinion, but all of them knowing that whatever way they were able to communicate it, it mattered towards that decision that was made for the classroom. Um, and then a lot of you said this in the chat, which is involving children in classroom decisions on classroom procedures and how to resolve conflicts. So, there's questions of like, well, how do we want to sign in the morning? Do we want to write our names? Do we want to do stamps? Like, how should we do centers? D- Do you guys want to all get dismissed at one time and just whoever gets there first gets there? Or, you know, um, do you want to have a paper clip or a clothespin that says like, I got to housekeeping and only four of us can be in housekeeping? Like, should we have a limit on how many people could be? What happens if somebody wants your toy? What are we going to do about that? Obviously, not all at once, but these are the sorts of discussions that, over time, they can really sort of start to see how people can work together to make a decision about procedures in a space, which is again very related to citizenship. I think lots of us have been parts of groups where those are the big discussions. How is this going to work? And that really gives you a sense of agency and involvement in those spaces. Okay, so we kind of talked about these three big ideas about how to teach leadership skills, or how to teach some skills that would contribute to a classroom where there's more children's leadership. Um, and so this is the time where, I had mentioned I would ask you to ponder these things for yourself. So are you ready for more leadership in your own classroom? And so some questions you might reflect on are, do I sense that children in my class have untapped leadership potential? Like, I see some kids who are following directions all the time and doing whatever I tell them, but I bet if they had a little more leeway, they would be taking more initiative. They will be helping peers, maybe having some opinions that are expected or unexpected. They're kind of ready to do more. Yeah, I kind of think of this as, when you're a mom, I'm a mom, and at different times you're like, all right, I'm doing this for my kid right now, but they might be ready to take that on, Kind of think of it like that. Is there some untapped potential that you're ready to let them tap? Um, Am I ready to let go of some control over learning activities and decisions? Again, you're the teacher. You're not going to let go of all control. Even if you do things like offer two choices of what kind of blocks are we going to have in our block center today? Or, should we have acrylic paints or watercolors, or even bigger decisions, you're only going to offer things that are appropriate. So it's not like you're opening the whole world up for them, but, you know, it might not be what you've expected, and you might have to work within kind of a different set of um, characteristics of the classroom if you hand over some of the control and decisions of things that are appropriate for children to decide on. So, are you ready for that? Are you ready to kind of let go and see what they're interested in? What do they want to do here in some of these spaces? And maybe be surprised. Um, do I understand the benefits of children developing as leaders? I think this is a key one. Um, I think lots of times as teachers, we go back to like, well, is there a benefit to this? Are they going to learn something? Will their life and their learning and their educational experience be better, because we're doing something this way? So, like, did that make sense to you, those benefits we talked about? And are you feeling like, yeah, there could be some challenges, but um, there's a lot of benefits that can happen when people aren't given those leadership opportunities? And this is I don't know, I put this at the end. It's not supposed to be a trick question, or that like there's one right answer and one wrong answer, but like a little pro tip, of use the golden rule. So, do you personally like working and learning more when you are seen as as engaged and competent in that space? People expect you to chime in, engage, and that what you say will be taken seriously. Like what you're talking about. Do you like that more? Or do you like to be in a space where you're given more direction and less autonomy? Um, you could answer either one of those, and I'm guessing you could answer somewhere on a spectrum of those, or you might have some places where you would love people to give you just a bunch of direction. But just for your larger life, which one of those would you prefer? And if you kind of leaned towards enjoying working and learning when you're seen as engaged and a competent, member of it, and there's both more responsibility placed on you, but also more kind of freedom, and higher consequences for what you do. If that seemed appealing, I think you can maybe relate to how children might feel. Um, you know, More responsibility. It's a big deal to kids, and I think they understand when they've been given more control and leadership and ownership of their spaces. I think you can see a difference when they feel like what they say really matters, that like what their opinion and their voice and their choices and their actions like were noticed and contributed to the good of the whole. Um, I think there's a lot of relevance in that. And, um, maybe take a gamble on them kind of thing. But I think it's good to ponder all of those things before you would jump in. Then thinking like you're there, you're going to be the teacher in this classroom. So what benefits could you experience from making this change? And so, you know, it's your job, it's your classroom, and how it goes is relevant to you as a person, as a professional. Um, so some benefits you might experience are increased engagement and productivity from students. Um, they know what to do, they know how to help each other. Um, they know the point of what's going on, what they're trying to accomplish as citizens of this learning environment. They're going to do more, and maybe it would be nicer some days if they were quieter and less productive, but you know, you're going to see more activity in your classroom, I do believe. You could see more debating, collaborating, compromising, and helping among students. Um, so that's a really neat thing to witness as an educator is people coming together for the purpose of learning and doing these kind of advanced things like debating and compromising. And it's pretty cool to see 3 and 4 year olds doing that and knowing that you're contributing to these long-term leadership skills. Um, and then awareness of long-term leadership potential in students that can be shared with families and future teachers. Um, this one, again, I think is very relevant to our students with disabilities. There are so many times when, from a young age, we're identifying students with certain disabilities as the person who's being helped. And what we're telling their families is, look, we've included this student and here's his buddy, and he comes along to like all of our activities, and everybody's so happy to have him here. And the thing that we're never saying is like, here's what this student is an expert at. Here's what he's helping his peers with. Here's a leadership skill he can take into kindergarten and first grade. And here's like how he's contributing to this environment, to the betterment of other students. And to have parents hear that kind of message and to have other future teachers hear that of here's a student with disabilities and here are the leadership skills I see in them that they can take forward into future classrooms and environments. That is a very powerful thing. And it's a very powerful way to help families and other teachers start viewing students with disabilities as well as their peers. And I think um, as early childhood educators to get everyone in that mindset early on can make a huge difference in the long term for some students with disabilities. And so that opportunity to share ideas and feedback and positive affirmations about their skills and traits, I think it has a very large payoff. Um, as we're getting close to the end here, I wanted to um, talk about a few resources on this topic that could be good for you if you want to read more about it. Sometimes you're part of a team in a school, and it could be weird if your classroom starts adding all these leadership skills, but other teachers aren't, or maybe you want to discuss this with your professional development team or kind of ponder it from a more scholarly lens. The first thing, I talked about at the beginning of this session was an article that's in Young Children that we wrote. It's called Learning, Practicing, and Exhibiting Leadership, Helping Children Develop as Classroom Leaders. Um, Again, the article covers those three big ideas we discussed, and it also kind of walks through those in a vignette form where we're framing a teacher who starts out with this sort of compliant classroom of students who follow directions, but they're not leaders. And she sort of pushes the envelope. And what actions does she take, and what is the result that she sees at the end? And it's in Young Children, which is very accessible in terms of reading level and ability to discuss it. So that's, I think, a great one if you just want to discuss things with your team. Um, There's a article in one of the monograph series. If you haven't read the DEC monographs related to the recommended practices, those are really great. They're a little bit more in depth than a an article, but they're not like as intense as a book chapter. Um, and there's a article called Leadership Leading from Where You Are. That's a great link here. And you can kind of think about if that is a relevant source for you. And then a book here, Education for a Civil Society, Teaching Young Children to Gain Five Democratic Life Skills. So really this is thinking about this idea of democracy and shared decision making from a larger lens, but it's related to young children. It could be a really good discussion for your team. And it's a very recent book as well. So that's a highly recommended kind of reading on the larger topic. Um, if you go to our website that I've talked about, Illinois Early Learning, um, I wish I could have like a show of hands, but I hope many of you know about Illinois Early Learning. If you don't, please, okay, I'm glad somebody's waving at me. If you don't, please go to our website. We really do have content on everything early childhood related under the sun. We write new content all the time. If you know us, you probably know us for our tip sheets. They come in up to 7 languages. They're written at 8th grade reading level or below. They're very appropriate to share with teachers, families, any educational staff. Glad somebody uses our tip sheets a lot. But we also kind of like to delve into some deeper content from time to time that we give like webinars or presentations at conferences, and this is one of those things. So some of our very specific content related to today's topic is everyone can be a leader, which is a toolkit. So a little more in depth of a product where we talk through some leadership ideas, citizenship and leadership, which is a resource list. So some links to some different types of reading you might do, and then who's the leader, which is a tip sheet. But again, you can find content related to anything on our website, and I want to make sure people know that before the end of any presentation we give. This is just very specific social studies related content. Um, and if you have questions about today's presentation or Illinois Early Learning in general, you are free to visit our website and use the contact us button, or you can email me uh, independently here at this website or this email address listed. Um, but I wanted to leave a few minutes in case anybody had comments or questions about the content as a whole, thoughts, ideas. I'm gonna invite your agency and challenging thoughts to follow my own recommendations here. So if there was anything you didn't agree with, you can share that as well. I am not the one who answers any questions about credit, so that I can't help with that.